In this video, I'd like to review some options for how we might visualize data within a smartwatch application, and also how we might animate that visualization. And so let's go ahead and take a look at a use case. The last video that I did with these screens, we were looking at some voice user interactions, some Lottie animations, some speech playback. But here I'd like to think about some use cases. And oftentimes one of the use cases of a smartwatch is to track health related information, such as your heart rate or calories burned or something else. And so let's look at how we might visualize that type of health data. I'm going to go ahead and make a duplicate of this intermediary screen here, which was after we did the voice interaction. We might want to go somewhere else. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to this intermediary screen. And we're going to start with that and then build out a sort of interaction from there. So I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate that to here. And I'm going to remove now on the screen 7, I've got some VUI animation, some text. I don't want those things on this particular screen, but let's actually add some data points on here. So let's say what I was doing is tracking my steps or something like that. And what we wanted to do is know how, my steps over the last hour. So one way we could do that is through graphs. So I'm going to go ahead and just use my line tool to create a kind of graph. So I could put that onto the screen here, sort of adjust the sizing as I'd want. And then what I want to do is just give that a nice sort of thick look to this, maybe a nice bright color for it. And what we'll do is manipulate that a little bit. So instead of having sort of angled, straight corners there, what I might want to do is round those corners off. So I could go ahead and just give myself a rounded cap on the end of those. If I double click on this line, what I could do is actually add different points to the line. And so when I do that, if I add some different points here, what I'd be able to do is actually turn those points into a graph. If I grab this, you can see that we could actually graph out different points along our path. And those things are actually animatable points. So if these represent certain different values or whatever, then what we could do is, assign some numbers to those values and then animate those things as we'd want from one screen to the next. If you didn't want to work just with straight lines, we could certainly do this in a different way as well. I'm going to take this line and just kind of move it up. Let's do a different example where we use our pen tool to sort of create these lines, and we could do that as well. We could sort of create a point and make sure that that particular point using our pen tool has paths to it. So we could, draw out some paths, make these kind of go up and down, and determine kind of what the look of our points should be as we go from one to the next. So if that's what I like, I'm going to go ahead and have that and give myself a little look to that. Maybe I'll turn that one to white. We'll give that a little bit larger border value here. Again, I'll have it sort of in a 5-pixel border, and I could adjust these values from one screen to the next as well and have more of a rounded sort of corner look to that. If I double click into there, we can get the individual points and we could take a look at what that looks like, maybe round these out a little bit more or change the sort of look of the lines as we'd want them to look. But then what I could do is animate those from one screen to the next. So if we were going like week to week or hour to hour and we wanted different looks to this, then the data might change. And so we could sort of readjust our graphs accordingly, where these things might go up and down in some different way, and that graph could be different. And the same thing with our pen tool version of this. We could adjust these points and lines. They could go sort of up and down depending on how we want this to work, and so we could adjust the lines accordingly to how we want these to shift and look from one screen to the next. So if we actually just take a look at an interaction, and what I'm going to do is just prototype this to touch to go one to the next, we'll auto animate that, and we'll make that take like 1 second to animate. I'm going to do an ease in and out on that one. If we take a look at that, you'd be able to see that these will transition from one to the next. And I wanted to do that. The actual trigger that I wanted was just a tap trigger, not a voice trigger. So I'm going to say that there's a tap trigger that will go one to the next, and you'll see that those lines could actually animate as we progress. So that's one way we might represent data, just through some kind of graph. Another way that we could represent our data, and I'm just going to go ahead and sort of duplicate out an artboard here. I don't really want this other content on that artboard. Would be to do something like bar graphs, right? So I might have data that's in the form of a bar graph. I'm going to turn the stroke off of that particular bar graph. But let's say I had maybe at least sort of 3 of these bar graphs. I'm going to just move those into the center here. They might all start with kind of no real height to them, if you will. And I'm just going to give a little bit so we can see something there. And what we could do is animate bar graphs to go to different heights. So what I'm going to do is like a progressive transition where I animate each bar graph one to the next. So once we go to this next screen, this bar graph is going to animate into its position of how tall or whatever it might be. And then I'm going to animate another bar graph here into its position, maybe sort of up here perhaps. Oops. I wanted to actually duplicate our screens as we do this, and I'm also thinking that I might want to have some values here. So before I actually get to this screen, let's think about what those values might be. So sometimes what I like to do is kind of start with the end state of them. So let's go ahead and put these bar graphs into like varying values. And so let's say they look like this. When I'm thinking about animating, I often want to start with my sort of end state animation. So I might want to figure out what sort of values I wanted here. I'm going to type in 50% and change the color of that to be to just match the background here. And let me scale that down just a little bit to maybe 16%. All right, so what I'm going to do is going to have some different values inside of our chart here. So let's go ahead and have 50%. This one's going to represent like maybe 35%. And then I'm going to have, and I'll sort of center that, and then we'll have one more up here. This one's going to represent like about 85%. Okay, so this is what I want to see maybe on the end screen, for example. What I might do is duplicate this, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit on here. I'm going to duplicate that 4 times, or 3 more times actually. So I'm going to have a couple different screens for this, and the very last one is where we're going to see the final result. Then what we're going to do is take these other ones and kind of adjust them so that we don't see really anything. And so I'm going to do that for basically these intermediary screens. And what I want to do is like do 1 bar graph at a time. And so the idea here is that we're going to start kind of from nothing, then one graph will happen, then the next graph will happen, and then finally our final graph would happen. And so I've got these intermediary steps so that they don't all animate at once, that they do a kind of progression type of animation. And so that might be one way that I want to sort of visualize that data and also sort of reveal it and animate it. And if we were going to set up a prototype for this, so I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to have a tap interaction to go to the very first one, and we'll auto animate to that first one. I don't want it to take quite that long, so I'm going to say like maybe 0.4 seconds there as the auto animate. And so we're going to go to that first graph, and then on the first graph here, I'm then going to just do a time interaction of 0 time where we go to the next one, and then this one's going to go to the final one in that case. So when I tap this particular screen, what we'll do is get a progression of our bar graph. And that'd be another way to represent data in some kind of way. It'd be this type of sort of bar graph way. Another way that I could represent some data, let's go ahead and just keep sort of iterating and thinking about how we might do this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more again. Let's say I just duplicate a blank screen here, and we'll come down. We'll come down to this one. I don't know if I don't think I have any content. Do I have any content in this one? Let's see. Oh, I've got all my different values in that. So I want to get rid of these things. Just have a blank screen. Okay, so another way I might represent some data is like an overall kind of pie chart or something. And so I might take, for example, a big circle and place that in here, and I'm going to give that circle a really no fill, but a really wide border. So let's say it was like a 40 pixel border there. And so we could take a look at what that might look like, that particular circle. What I want to do with this is actually have a sort of background version of it that shows the completed circle. And I think what I'll do is just take a sort of darker version of my background. And then I'm going to duplicate this circle. I want to make sure it's in the right spot. Maybe I want it centered, so I'll put that there. I'll duplicate it with Control D or Command D, which gives me a duplicate version of it. And that top version is going to be here in white, except that I don't want it filling the entire thing. And what I could do is choose a dash amount. So let's say I had a dash of 50. You can see that we get these thick dashes, but I'm going to make my gap really, really big so that I only get sort of a 50 pixel version. And you'll notice that if I adjust the width of that dash, we can actually go we can adjust the amount and even have something that sort of animates around this, this circle. And so I'm going to do that here, and in the very center maybe I put some sort of percentage amount. So let's say the percentage amount started at like 20%. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe put in some values here. And I want those in white. And I'm going to go ahead and just scale this way up so we can see that. And we could take a look at how we might animate this percentage around the circle here. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and adjust this now by duplicating this artboard to another one. And so if that represented 20%, then maybe we want something that's a little bigger than that, like we want it to go all the way to like 80%, let's say. And so in that particular case, I'm going to go ahead and change my dash width, and I'm going to just keep increasing this up until it sort of goes around the edge and fills in what I would consider, I'm just going to eyeball it visually, but let's say we think that it gets about 80% of the, of the available circle. It might be even more than 80, but there we go. It's close. So there we go. We've got a kind of idea here where we might move from, this doesn't look like quite 20%, so I don't know, maybe that dash should be just a little bit bigger on this end, and then we can go all the way around to represent 80. If we make a transition between these, so I'm going to just prototype with just a simple tap interaction for right now. So we'll say that when we tap, we're going to go from one to the next, and we'll make that like a 1 second animation. If we take a look at that, we could represent some data within a kind of pie chart there, and that could be an animated transition. So what I want to do is make sure that that sort of auto animates one to the next. And the weird thing about that was my transition there didn't seem to work. So you should be able to animate that bar chart, and it looks like it just sort of faded to the next one. Let's try it again. I want to duplicate one, go to the other, and change the value here of the dash. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a different value there, and let me just prototype this out so that when I tap, we go one to the next with an auto animate, and you should be able to animate that chart. So there we go, we're seeing that move there. Must have made some kind of error the very first time, but that's a possibility that we could animate that to go from one thing to the next. And then what I'd want is this other one to just change values, to be something else. So maybe we go to 40% there. That part really won't animate though, because those numbers just sort of switch from one to the other. So that just sort of changes to 40%. If you actually want to animate the text and make it feel like the text itself is changing, that's a little bit more difficult inside of animate, inside here of XD, to animate that text change, but we could explore that. What I might do is just create a new artboard here. I'm just going to duplicate this one. And let's say you did want to explore this idea of sort of text change. I'm just going to get rid of these other values. We could do that. And the way that we would do it is we're going to sort of create a number of, let's see. So I'm going to have here, first I'm just going to hit enter. Then I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm going to get a column of values. This is what I'm sort of interested in, is this sort of column of values. And what we could do is have another column, sort of maybe 3 columns of values, and then this one right here, I'm actually going to get rid of everything except for the percentage sign. I'm going to bring that down and kind of adjust it to where I want it to be. Okay, so what we could do with this is put a mask over this. So in this particular case, I'm going to mask out everything but our very top line. So I'm going to create a sort of box on top of this. I'm going to use that box, and I'm going to just sort of readjust these. I'm going to use that box to mask everything else out. So I'm going to select all this stuff. We're going to say that we want to mask with shape. So all we see ultimately is the first value here. And what we could do is adjust these values. So if I look at these different columns within our within our design, we could adjust those. So for example, this second column, I don't want to see the 0. I could move that down to whatever value, like maybe we don't want to see that. We don't want to see whether we're above 100%. We could adjust these particular values up and down. So maybe I have this, for example, start at 10% as a kind of beginning place. And then if we wanted to animate that, we could then create another artboard down the line where we change those values. So then I'm going to come into here and say, okay, let's say it goes from 10% to 45 let's say it goes to 75%. So what I could do is put my columns into these places, and we could get this simulation of animating text in that way by bringing it to this other environment. And I want those to kind of line up correctly. It looks like I got it a little bit in the wrong spot. Okay, so then what we could do is simply go from one to the other. Let's take a look at what that prototype might look like as we make a progression. And what we'll do is just sort of preview that, and we could see the animation of that text if indeed that's something that you wanted to simulate, is that idea that that would sort of animate into place. That would be one way to sort of animate numbers in terms of the data. It's a little wonky perhaps as a way of doing it. I think it'd probably be acceptable to just have those fade to the new values or transition to the new values as well. But that's certainly something that we could think about. Let's do one other sort of data visualization piece. So I'm going to duplicate this artboard one more time, and I don't really want this mask group in that one. But what I might do, like I was thinking about an app that might track my water usage, for example. And this idea of working with masks could be pretty powerful for that. Let's say what I had was a kind of glass, and what I want to do maybe is adjust this shape to be more of a glass shape here. So I'm going to double click on this in order to get those points, and I'm just going to adjust this in to be more of a glass looking type of shape. And let's see, I'll take the fill of that and make it kind of a dark version of my background. I'm going to just darken it out. And then I'm going to get rid of the border on that one. All right, and then let's see. I'm going to duplicate this out. And I'm going to have one that has an upper border but no fill. So I want like a border on top that sort of just shows the outline of this. Maybe I give that a little thicker edge to it. All right, so the concept here is that this is like a cup, and I want to fill that cup with some sort of water or value or whatever, sort of fill it up. What I could do is use this cup shape as a type of mask for my my actual content. So and then we could animate that content sort of be, you know, within the mask itself. So here's what I mean by that. Let's say what I wanted to do was fill that with some water. What I might do is create some water, whether that's white or some other color. Maybe, you know, if we want it to be water, I would make it a bluish color, perhaps. So I'm going to give it a little tint here, take the border off of it. But what I want here is that water to be kind of a smaller value initially, and I don't want to see that value. So I'm going to put it underneath the path that's going to be the mask, which is, let's see, this one's the stroke, and so I'm going to lock that one. But this one is going to represent the background, and I want to duplicate that again, because I do want the background underneath this as well as working as a mask for the rectangle. So you'll see what I'm talking about here. I'm going to select these two together, and I'm going to make this mask with shape. In other words, that I've got this, the background still shows up, so I can turn that off. It sort of fills in the dark part. But the mask group, if we open that up, has our water in it, and then it has our path that acts as a mask. And the last thing I wanted maybe was some kind of text value here in this. So we might have some kind of percentage or something like that that we could reveal. I don't know where that, we could put that above or in the cup itself. What I might do is just say, hey, you know, we're going to be at a certain value, like 50%, or let's make it like, you know, 70% or something. And we can put that somewhere within our cup here. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is just make a transition if we were animating that data, and this could be a way of representing that where we animate behind a mask. And the way that I'm going to do that is just grabbing this content, making it larger, and it goes up to about 70% of the glass. And so what we could do on the other end here is make that percentage just sort of fade in while the water animates in. And so if we take a look at what that would look like, what we would do is simply we would go to our prototype, wire this up, and we would progress one to the next thing. Let's say on tap, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that progression, and you'd see that we get this idea of filling up the water behind a mask. Another way that we might kind of think about visualizing data or something like that, or having some kind of representation. So there's a lot of options here on how we might do things like bar charts and graphs, pie charts. So there's certainly others that we could do, but hopefully this gives you a few ideas and also shows you how you might think about animating that data. Now, of course, the one thing that we were doing earlier that we didn't necessarily do here is we wanted to make some transition from our voice interaction to the data pieces that we wanted. And so I'm going to go ahead and add that back because this was a voice action. So let's say we, you know, added a glass of water to our water log or something. What I might do is have a prototype here that gives us the ability to add additional sort of voice interactions. So another voice command that we might have. I already have one to go to an alarm. I'm going to have another one that says add to the water log. And if we happen to say that, what we're going to do is I'm going to have it auto animate to artboard 6 here. And that was a transition artboard. And then from that one, I'm going to add an interaction for time. And it's going to auto animate from that one to our artboard 17. So I'm going to go ahead and go to artboard 17. Actually, that might just be a transition to that one. And then on this one, I'm going to go ahead and have an automatic time transition to the very next artboard, let's say 18. And that will auto animate to, and it's going to take a second to go from that one to 18. Okay, so I now should have another interaction here that if we say add to the water log would take us to the water one. And just to demonstrate that, if we come on here, there's two things that I should be able to say.
I'm listening.
I should be able to either say that I want to set the alarm, or what I could say is add to the water log. And then it should transition us to that particular data in that particular case. So you can have more than one voice trigger. And since my video right before this was talking about that, I wanted to demonstrate, well, how do we kind of move to more than one different voice trigger? So that's worked out here. Hopefully this gives you some ideas on different things that you could do if you're building your own health and wellness related smartwatch application or data visualization type of smartwatch application, how you might actually represent some of that data or animate it. Good luck in your own efforts on your smartwatch app.